There is a story in the Old Testament that, if I'm honest with you, is considered the most disturbing in the entire Bible, and that could very well be considered unsuitable for minors. So before you watch this video, I want to make sure that you know that this video is not suitable for all ages and may very well trigger some sort of trauma from your past. The story I am referring to is found in chapters 19 to 21 of the book of Judges. Many people know chapter 19 but don't read the rest of the story. I believe there are several important lessons you and I need to learn from such a disturbing story. First of all, I'm going to tell you the story as dramatically as possible, and then I'm going to explore the lessons that I think we can learn. Join me in Judges chapter 19. In chapter 19, verse 1, in the days when there was no king in Israel, a Levite who lived in a remote part of the mountainous country of Ephraim acquired a woman from Bethlehem of Judah as his concubine. I want you to understand. Here is a Levite man living in the northern part of Israel. And he acquires this woman to be his concubine or wife, whatever you want to call it. And she's living in the south, in Bethlehem. We continue the story. She was unfaithful to him and left him for her father's house in Bethlehem of Judah, where she stayed for 4 months. She betrayed him, returned to her father's house in Bethlehem. So, the story continues. Essentially, this Levite man wants to get his wife back, so he travels from the north, from the mountainous country of Ephraim to the south, to Bethlehem, to pick up this woman and be with her again. He gets there, and her father is very hospitable. Several times the guy says, "Hey, I have to leave, give me my wife so I can come home." And daddy says, "No, stay one more night." He says, "Okay, I'll stay one more night." And this goes on for several days, until finally the man says, "Hey, with all due respect, thank you for your hospitality, but I need to go home." Then he finally leaves back home, and that's when the whole tragedy occurs. Well, the man is with his traveling concubine from Bethlehem in southern Israel to the north in Ephraim. They were near Jebus, and the day was almost over. The servant said to his master, "Please, why don't we stop in this Jebusite town and talk here at night?" But his master replied, "Let's not stop in a foreign city where there are no Israelis, let's continue to Jebusite." Then his servant said, "Let us try to reach one of these places and spend the night in Jebusite or Ramah." So they continued their journey, and the sun set as they approached Jebusite at Benjamin. So they go there, and to their surprise, no one is willing to welcome them into their homes. Hospitality was a huge thing in Israeli culture. At the end of the night, an old man appears in the square and says, "Why are you still here? Has anyone ever welcomed you into their home?" And they said, No one took us in." And the old man says, "You know what? You can stay with me tonight." And the Levite replies, "Good. I just want to let you know that we don't need anything from you. We have enough food for our donkeys, for me and my concubine. I just need a place to rest my head. If you give me a pillow, that's all I need." And the old man says, "No problem, you can stay with me. We're good." So, this Levite man, his servant, and his concubine spend the night at this man's house in Jebusite. And then this happens. While they were having fun, suddenly, evil men from the city surrounded the house and knocked on the door. They told the owner of the house, the old man, "Bring the man who came to your house so that we can have sex with him." Wow man, this is where the story takes a rumor. There are perverted men living in Jebusite, Benjamites, who go to this old man's house and say, "Hey, we know you have a guest in your house, bring him out so we can all have sex with him." Now, notice what happens next. The master of the house came out and said, "Please don't do this wickedness, my brothers. After all, this man came to my house. Don't commit this horrible atrocity here. Let me bring my virgin daughter and the man's concubine. Abuse them and do whatever you want with them. But don't commit this outrageous thing against this man. We're going to deal with that a little bit later in this video. But what happens next is unthinkable. It says in verse 25 that, "But the man would not listen, so he took his concubine and led her out to them. They raped and abused her all night until dawn. At dawn, I let her go." Now, my friend, that's why I said that this video may be considered X-rated and may trigger some things from your past. Because I want you to imagine, here is a group of perverted men, and they are revealing themselves to have sex with this woman. They're raping all night long, until in the morning, they finally leave it. And that's what happens to this sad young woman. Early in the morning, the woman returns, and as it was light, she collapsed at the door of the man's house where her master was. Can you imagine? She's so worn out, so beaten, so abused all night long by these men, that she barely has the strength to drag herself back to this man's house and just collapses on the porch and lies down. Now, notice what happens next. It says here that when his master manifested himself in the morning, opened the doors of the house and went out to continue his journey, there was the woman, his concubine, collapsed near the door of the house with her hands on the thresholds. "Get up," he told her, "let's go." But there was no response. The woman had been so abused that she had died. Notice that it says here that the man put her on his donkey and set off for home. Now, what's going to happen next is very sad and horrible. But he says it like this: when he entered his house, took a knife, held his concubine, cut her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and then envied her throughout the territory of Israel. Everyone who saw it said, "Nothing like this has ever happened or been seen from the day the Israelites came out of the land of Egypt until now." Think about it, discuss it, and talk about it. This man took his concubine home, cut her into 12 pieces, and no doubt attached a letter to each piece of his deceased concubine, and envied a different piece of her body to the 12 tribes of Israel with a letter telling exactly what had been done by his own brothers. One of the 12 tribes of Israel, the tribe of Benjamin. And when these other tribes saw and read what had happened to this woman, they said, "Nothing like this has ever happened throughout our history." Now, there's a lot more to the story in chapters 20 and 21, so I want you to wait. But this is where I want to start a look at some lessons we can learn from this. And the first lesson is this. When there is no accountability in our lives, we have a strong tendency to get sidetracked. Notice the 19th chapter of Judges, verse 1, which we read earlier, but I'm going to read it again. In those days, when there was no king in Israel. You see, when you and I don't have to be accountable, when there's no fear of having to explain ourselves or being responsible for our decisions and actions, my friend, we're more exposed to making ruinous decisions, because we think we can make those decisions in isolation, without having to answer to anyone else. And that's exactly what was happening in Israel. There was no king. There was a law. But people are not taken care of by respecting the law. It wasn't being enforced. And as a result, what happened? They ended up doing something they probably never imagined they would do. The second mini lesson I want to address is to make sure that we treat every human being as an image bearer of God. Here's this man saying, "You know, it would be wrong for you to do what you want with this man, but do what you want with my daughter and his concubine." His mind was that this man's life and virtue were worth more than his own daughter and this man's concubine. We need to make sure, and that's why watching inappropriate websites and things like that, we need to make sure we don't do that. If you want to stop watching things online that you know you shouldn't be watching, and you know what I'm talking about, I want you to see every girl that you're looking at as an image bearer of God, as someone, your daughter. Imagine if you'd like someone to look at your daughter doing the things you're selling on the screen. But here's the third thing I want to highlight in this video. The farther you and I drift away from God, the more vulnerable we are to doing things we never imagined we would do. You see, when you look at the book of Judges as a whole, what you see is a nation of people who have been slowly drifting away from God. And what you see happening in chapters 19 through 21 is the culmination of turning away from God, and it shows how far the nation as a whole has gone back from God. And my friend, you and I are no different, because if we don't maintain a connection with God, if we save ourselves from God, if we turn away from God, that's when we, like the Israelites, will find ourselves doing things that someone, 10 years earlier, would have tried to tell us we would do. And we'd be better off that, somehow, we do those things. There's no way I'm going to get a divorce. There's no way I'm going to have an affair. There's no way I can get fired from my job because I found something online. There's no way I'm smoking weed or whatever. The farther you stray from God, the more vulnerable you become to committing this sin. Now, the story doesn't end at chapter 19. I'd like it to end. But actually, worse. Because what happens now, in chapter 20, is a civil war between the 11 tribes of Israel, and they're fighting the tribe of Benjamin. Because it is a tribe of Benjamin who committed this heinous act of sin against one of their own Israelite brothers. So I want to encourage you to read chapters 20 and 21 in detail. But to sum it up, there's a huge battle. Thousands upon thousands of lives were lost as a result of this battle, on both sides. And what ends up happening is that there are only 600 Benjamite men left. So in chapter 21, how do 11 other tribes start to feel bad or feel sorry for the tribe of Benjamin? Because basically they're afraid that this tribe of Benjamin is going to go extinct, since there are 600 men alive. But there are no Benjamin's wives for them to marry and procreate. Now they have another problem, because now they are worried that one of their 12 tribes of Israel is going to become extinct. Now that leads to my fourth lesson. Every bad decision we make has consequences we can't choose. Although these Benjamite people have done something wrong, the other 11 tribes coming are actually fighting and killing, as it was a decision they made, and now they have to pay for the outcome of that decision. And the Benjamites also have to pay for the outcome of their bad decision. Listen, you can choose your sin. But it cannot choose its consequences. Every decision you make has consequences. And the problem is personal, you and I can't choose those kinds of consequences. So what happens is that these Israelites go and kill men from this clan called Jabesh Gilead. And there are 400 women who have never been with a man. So they take these 400 women and give them to 400 of the 600 Benjamite men, for these Benjamite men to procreate. But what's the problem? Simple math. There were 600 Benjamite men who could not find wives, because all the wives were murdered and killed. And 400 of them now have a wife given to them from the clan of Jabesh Gilead. So the problem is that there are now 200 men from Benjamin who don't have wives. And that's why I said that one bad decision often leads to another, because what happens next is that these Israelis basically say, you know what, we all took an oath and said we can't imagine giving our daughters to any of the Benjamites, but it doesn't say anything about if they're taken. So what happens is they have to make another bad decision, and they say, hey, you know what, and this is what the Benjamites have to do. They send a message and say, hey, look, there's a festival coming up, a party, and basically some of our daughters are going to be dancing and having fun at this party. Technically, we can't give your daughters because we swore an oath, but if you find them and kidnap them, that's your problem. If you find them and kidnap them, We will be free of that oath because the technicians have not shown our daughters to you, and you will be able to have a wife and procreate. So they have this party, and essentially these 200 Benjamite men go and rob and kidnap these women while they're dancing at a party and take them back as their wives. Now guys, I know this is a crazy story and I tried to summarize it as quickly as I could, but the point is this. One bad decision often leads to another, and all sorts of decisions ruin other people. Go through that story again and see how many people have been affected by a bad decision. Some of the Benjamite men deserved what happened to them, but most of the people in Benjamin had nothing to do with it and died in battle. The people of Jabesh of Lead also died. The women were then taken from their land and given to these Benjamites. And then, these other women were kidnapped by the Benjamite men and taken away from their families. All of this happened because of ruinous decisions, but here's the fifth and final lesson I want to encourage you today. God has grace for us, even in the midst of our most destructive decisions. Notice how the book of Judges ends. It says here that the Benjamites did this and took the number of women they needed from the dancers they captured. They went back to their own heritage, rebuilt their cities, and lived in them. At that time, each of the Israelis returned from there to their own tribe and family. Each returned from there to his own inheritance. And of course, the last verse of the book of Judges characterizes and describes the entire book of Judges. It says here that in those days there was no king in Israel. Each one does what seems right to him. My friend, while God was gracious in allowing this tribe of Benjamin to rebuild and repopulate and not go extinct, there were consequences to their decisions. And if there's nothing else you take away from this video, I want to encourage you to understand that every decision you and I make has consequences. Often, consequences that can't even be measured and consequences that we can't choose. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now. God bless you.
Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.